The dangerous side of desire. Semen retention, Jung's forgotten revelation. It will explore Jung's concepts of desire, libido, the shadow, and the psychological symbolism of semen retention as mastery over psychic energy, without any explicit detail. Desire, for Carl Jung, was never merely an instinctual hunger or a biological necessity. It was a metaphysical current, a psychic energy that pulsed through the fabric of consciousness. Jung saw the libido not as purely sexual, but as the fundamental life force, the same energy that creates art, fuels ambition, drives innovation, and inspires spirituality. In his view, desire was the movement of the psyche toward wholeness, but it was also perilous, for it could easily descend into obsession, dependency, or the unconscious domination of the ego by primal instincts. The danger lay in identifying too closely with the objects of one's longing. For what begins as attraction often ends as possession. Jung's revelation was that what we desire most intensely is rarely another person or a thing, but rather a reflection of the parts of ourselves we have not yet integrated, the unlived potential of our own soul. The erotic pull toward another is thus symbolic of an inner hunger to unite with what is missing within us. In this light, the practice of semen retention, when viewed philosophically, can be understood as the conscious redirection of this psychic energy from external gratification toward internal transformation. It becomes not a denial of desire, but its refinement, not repression, but the alchemical containment of raw life force to serve a higher psychological evolution. For Jung, the unconscious mind was populated by archetypes, primordial images, and patterns of energy that shape human behavior and experience. Among these, the shadow represented all that we repress or deny, our fears, instincts, and impulses that contradict our conscious identity. Desire, being instinctual and often irrational, was intimately linked to this shadow realm. The more we denied it, the more it grew in power and subtlety, influencing our choices from beneath awareness. Jung warned that to suppress desire entirely was to risk neurosis, for energy that is blocked becomes distorted. Yet to indulge it blindly was equally dangerous, for the individual becomes enslaved by the very forces meant to serve their growth. Here lies the paradox. Desire must neither be killed nor worshipped, it must be integrated. In this context, semen retention symbolizes a disciplined relationship with desire, not the extinguishing of the libido, but its conscious holding. It is akin to containing fire in a vessel rather than letting it burn uncontrolled. Jung might have said that such containment allows the libido to ascend rather than disperse, transforming instinct into insight and compulsion into creativity. The modern man who practices retention, whether knowingly or intuitively, is engaging in a form of inner alchemy, redirecting his psychic energy from outward consumption to inward illumination. The concept of sublimation was central to Jung's thought. Unlike repression, sublimation was not a denial of instinct, but its transformation into culturally or spiritually valuable forms. He argued that civilization itself was built upon this process, that the same energy which once drove primitive man to hunt and reproduce now fuels art, philosophy, and science. The sexual instinct, when refined through consciousness, becomes a bridge between body and spirit. In Jungian terms, the libido is proteon. It can manifest as lust or as love, as ambition or devotion, depending on the channel it finds. Semen retention, therefore, can be seen as a symbolic act of sublimation, an effort to reclaim this primal energy and guide it toward purpose. The retention of seminal energy mirrors the psychological act of holding one's desire long enough to understand it, long enough to let it reveal its true aim. For behind every impulse lies a deeper yearning, not for pleasure alone, but for unity, meaning, and transcendence. To retain, then, is to listen. It is to pause the instinctual urge and ask, what does this longing truly seek? Jung would argue that such questioning opens the path from instinct to individuation, the process by which one becomes whole. Yet the dangerous side of desire, Jung warned, was its power to possess the ego. When libido is not consciously integrated, it manifests as projection. We see in others what we cannot yet face in ourselves. The beloved becomes an idol, carrying the image of the inner feminine that represents our emotional and intuitive depths. This projection can create intense attraction, but also deep suffering, for no external person can fulfill an inner archetype. The tragedy of modern desire lies in confusing the symbol for the source, chasing bodhi's status or validation instead of integrating the inner energy that gives rise to the chase. Jung's forgotten revelation, then, is that desire's true purpose is not satisfaction, but self-realization. Semen retention, interpreted through this lens, becomes an act of withdrawing projection, of turning the gaze inward to encounter the anima within, rather than pursuing her endlessly without. by containing the energy that would otherwise scatter through fleeting pleasure. The individual invites dialogue with the unconscious. The restless libido becomes light, illuminating the psyche, revealing not fantasy, but truth. The danger of desire thus becomes its doorway. Only by facing its fire without succumbing to it can one discover the gold hidden in its ashes. The alchemists, whom Jung studied deeply, spoke of koning-enkyo, the sacred union of opposites that produced transformation. In psychological terms, this was the marriage of consciousness and the unconscious, of the masculine logos and the feminine eros within. The practice of restraint, whether physical or psychic, was for Jung an image of this alchemical process. The semen retained symbolizes the unspent potential of the soul, a storehouse of creative energy, awaiting spiritual marriage rather than physical release. When one consciously holds this energy, it begins to transmute. Desire becomes devotion, passion becomes purpose, and lust becomes luminosity. But this transformation is not achieved by willpower alone. It requires self-knowledge, honesty, and surrender to the deeper intelligence of the psyche. The man who practices retention without understanding risks, turning discipline into pride, repression into rigidity. Jung's wisdom reminds us that integration, not control, is the goal. The energy must circulate, not stagnate. The containment of desire is meaningful only if it leads to the flowering of the inner self, to the realization that what one seeks outwardly has always been present inwardly. Thus, semen retention becomes not a rule, but a ritual. A sacred pause that allows the psyche to weave instinct into insight, and animal fire into divine light. In the end, Jung's most dangerous revelation was simple, yet profound. That desire is not to be escaped, but understood. Not to be shamed, but transformed. The libido is both serpent and savior, shadow and light, depending on how consciousness relates to it. Every act of desire is an invitation from the unconscious to awaken, to discover the greater pattern moving within one's being. When one learns to hold this energy not as repression, but as reverence, the entire orientation of life shifts. Relationships cease to be driven by need and become expressions of shared wholeness. Creativity blooms not from emptiness, but from fullness. The individual no longer ceases meaning, he emanates it. This is the silent wisdom beneath Jung's teachings and the symbolic power of semen retention. That mastery over desire is not the conquest of flesh, but the reconciliation of spirit. The dark side of desire, then, is not its existence, but our ignorance of its nature. To understand it is to reclaim the lost bridge between instinct and insight, body and soul. Jung's forgotten revelation lives wherever a human being dares to face his own longing and chooses not to be consumed by it, but to be transformed through it. Before we conclude, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and do not forget to drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know where you are watching from. And if you ever have any questions, join our Telegram channel where we interact directly and help each other grow. The link is in the description.